First thing I want to do is just tell you a little bit about myself, just so you know who's talking to you for the next 20, 25 minutes. I'm Ian Thompson. I'm the country manager for Tradeshift here in the UK. I've been doing that role for 3 years now. And prior to that, I've got around 15 years of experience on the technology side of procurement. So very familiar with e-procurement, electronic sourcing, supply chain integration, and also consulted on some procurement projects. So I've had an interesting time and been able to observe lots of different procurement departments and people and projects over the years. I think I'd also like to give a quick, honest health warning that I'm not a practitioner like you. I've looked in from the outside, but I think that actually gives me some interesting observations to make and some different perspectives. So hopefully you'll find this session useful. So that's me. So what's the plan? The plan is to introduce the topic. I was given this topic. It's about sort of contrasting cost and value as procurement people. And I've spent a couple of days thinking about that. And in some ways, it's quite, when you get under the skin of it, it's quite deep. So I wanted to just think about the topic itself. Why does it matter for us? So we are, we gather at events like this, and we are a group of professionals together. We represent our trade and the world of procurement. And so why does this topic even matter? And then some ideas about what we can do to try and think about things from a value perspective and not necessarily as everything being about at the transactional level and driving the next 1% of cost saving, which of course is very important to us. So that's the plan. It's just to give you that structure as we move through. So moving procurement from a cost focus to more of a value focus. So what does that mean? So I have lots of different meetings, lots of different companies, and you meet a CPO and he'll say, well, Ian, just to introduce myself, I'm not the kind of guy that thinks about all about percentages of cost. I'm not a tactician. I'm a strategic CPO, and I think about vision and innovation and bringing value to my company. And that's kind of a conversation I think we've all had at events like this over past years. And I'll say, oh, that's great. So am I. I'm a strategic, value-orientated person too. And that means you're going to like Tradeshift, is what I'm normally there to talk to them about. But is it just kind of platitudes? Does it actually mean anything? What are we actually talking about when we say we want to drive value for our employer as procurement people, as opposed to perhaps the more prosaic things that we think about each day? So that's kind of what I want to get to. Why does it even matter for us? And I think one of the reasons we've been able to do all of the kind of the business buzzwords for a long time and then just carry on being the way we are is actually the board of big companies. All they really want to see or are trained to see from us are those marginal cost savings. But I think we might be at a bit of a cliff edge, a bit of a time when things are going to change. And that might be why we need to stop talking the good game and start to think about this topic a bit more seriously. So to use an example from a parallel, business function from IT, in 1995, $15 billion was spent on mainframe computing. Seemed like the right time to do that at the time. Nobody really knew that within 5 years that industry would be starting to die. It's a great sort of story and example of where we don't want to be as procurement people. Having said that, you'd be surprised how many people in how many large businesses that I talk to who do still run mainframe infrastructure. So it's not nothing is ever as black and white as we like to make out in the marketing story, but it's a good example all the same. So is procurement about to have that mainframe moment, that IT moment when you're disrupted by distributed computing power, by the cloud, and so on and so on? So maybe it is. And why might that be the case? Well, if you look at the bigger picture, if you look at the global business picture, the corporate picture, been some massive changes. So it used to be, when a company was in the Fortune 500, it was like a lifetime. It was like the lifespan of an average person that you'd expect that to be. I'm pretty sure the only one that's been in there from inception to now is General Electric. But otherwise, there's now becoming huge amount of churn, and the average lifespan is now 15 years. And I think that's a really remarkable statistic, and it shows, and that affects our lives. You know, your career, being a one-company person, job for life, all of those things are changing around us. And why has it been the case that we have this 15-year life expectancy now? And the whole disruptive thing, I think another buzzword, right? everything's disruptive, but it's really true. So crazy things happening in the political world, globalization, world security, technology growing in incredible ways, small, aggressive technological companies, a bit like Tradeshift, but times 10,000 all around the world, disrupting bigger companies. So more justification that this might be the time to start really thinking about what can we bring as procurement people to this game. So I saw this on LinkedIn last week. I apologize. Sometimes you see things on LinkedIn, you think, well, that's been going around for years. So I apologize if I'm late to catch on, but I just thought it was such a powerful message. So the front page of Forbes magazine, less than 10 years ago, can Nokia ever be caught? So, a platform, a few apps later, smartphones, and we know the history on that story. And obviously sad for some of the people involved, but what a massive change. And it's not often you get that headline there, can anyone catch the phone king? And that's the really interesting thing about history, is you only know things at the point, and you can only make predictions, and often they're very, very unpredictable. So the question is, going back to this topic about cost and value, if we, as procurement people, were working at some of these companies, do you think that saving that 3%, of squeezing that margin of, the people doing business with us have a finite margin and us fishing for more and more of it, do you think that really would have changed the outcome? Clearly not. And yet there are things that we can do. And this isn't, I don't have all the answers today, but this is kind of the forum where we should be talking about it at our networking breaks and things. There are things that can bring innovation and change to our companies as procurement people. So I'm just going to grab a... By the way, I hope there's some people out there, because I can't see anything with the lights in my face. But some definitions. Let's talk about the words. As business people, we use words all the time, don't we, that make us sound knowledgeable, smart, strategic, and so on. But it's sometimes good to actually dig into what they actually mean. And what I've done is I've done a bit of research, a bit of reading, mainly Google, obviously, and kind of put together definitions for these terms that are probably the fairest representation of the suggestions. And cost is actually what we know has to be given up in order to obtain something. And it's quite interesting. There's three elements to that. So what we know, what we have to give away, and what we get. So quite simple, and that's actually what cost means. And it's also easy to measure, which I think is why we tend to focus on that particular element, and why our boards and our C-suite tend to think about this element. So if you think about it, I bought a car recently. I know what that cost. I've got a very good idea of what it's going to cost in the future. But the value that it's going to bring to me is actually determined by, how reliable it actually turns out to be, what my family starts to do over the next 3 or 4 years, what my job looks like, whether I crash the thing, I don't actually understand the outcome of the value side of that transaction until later on, whereas we understand the cost straight away. It's what I had to give up to obtain that thing, and I know the price. I think that's quite interesting, just to be that clear about what we're talking about on this topic. Value is actually different, and it's a little bit more of a sort of philosophical question almost. So it's the regard with which something is held, and it's the usefulness of something. That's actually the value, and we normally only know about the outcome of that, about what happened later on, and therefore it's really difficult to measure what value is. So it's much more nebulous. So if you think about it, in this room, probably one of the most valuable things to all of us is the oxygen we're breathing, right? Just the air. But you didn't pay for it. Nobody's paying for that, maybe through society, clean air and so on. But ultimately something extremely valuable to us all, and we haven't given something up to obtain it. So another interesting point, we can do things that are immensely valuable that aren't about our bottom line, aren't about the cost of transaction, can't be put in a spreadsheet. So that's some definitions from you, and just for you, sorry. But just to kind of develop that a little bit more. So when you're thinking about value, it's almost like what investors do. So I'm going to bet and believe and hope that some actions I'm going to take are going to be beneficial to the company that I work for. Whereas cost is much more thinking about spreadsheets, things that we can write down and understand. So it's almost like, taking procurement and making it just an extension of finance, which we all know it's not, right? So if it's sort of from a body language point of view, value is out here, it's looking up, and thinking about cost is being the accountant and filling in your numbers. So the other thing that's interesting, so start to think about this from a technology point of view, which I'm always going to do because I'm a technology guy and I've worked my career in technology companies. Value is actually something that we're not near developing technology that can truly understand it, predict it, and create it. That's actually, if you look at that from an artificial intelligence point of view, that's general artificial intelligence, which is starting to make computers act like we can. And that actually isn't that close. And the day it happens, it will actually explode. But that, as far as we know, is quite a long way in the future. However, there is all sorts of artificial intelligence which is specific, specialized, can be pointed at data sets that can really manage cost very well already. So when we think about our careers and what we want to be doing as a group of professionals, we don't want to be competing with, the procurement terminator who can do all of the transactional stuff. We need to be thinking about the stuff that he can't do or she can't do, that intelligence that is starting to come in the technology industry cannot deal with yet. So that was a few perspectives on value and cost and what the words really mean and how we should think about them. And I actually found when I was reading up on that, I thought that was quite interesting to stop it just being speak and what do we actually mean by that. So what you're looking at now is the Sombrero Galaxy. I'm quite interested in science and space generally, so that's kind of where my mind went when I was thinking about value. It's 101 million light years away, and that image was captured by the Hubble Space Telescope. And I asked Google Home, what's that in miles? Because I don't really understand light years. So does anyone think they can say this number in miles? Because I'll buy you a pint if anyone can say it now. But it's incredible, isn't it? And of course there's value in this because it gives us our place in the universe and, in a sort of slightly philosophical sense. But actually, these images started to help scientists understand dark matter, and they now believe dark matter may be the key to understanding very, very cheap and clean energy. So that could be immensely valuable for mankind. But interestingly, when they were doing the projects and proposals for Hubble, and they looked at the industry and they looked at the market and the components and what would need to be done on the project, and then looked at the cost benefit, no, we shouldn't do it. And I thought that was a really interesting thing. And we can apply that ourselves, can't we? No, we're not going to do that because it's not a clear spreadsheet case. Well, what about the fact that companies are disappearing out of the Fortune 500 at a rate of knots? And what could we do? What risks could we take? What innovation and relationships could we build? I thought that was really, really interesting. So both the International Space Station and Hubble were cost disasters, and yet huge benefits to people. There's certain drugs that can only be looked at a molecular level without Earth gravity. So real people benefiting from these projects, and you can't really put a cost or a price or a benefit on that. So I just thought it's worth, taking ourselves out of eWorld and procurement for a moment and thinking about that bigger picture and what these topics actually mean. And I'm just putting this in here because I think it's one of my favorite procurement quotes. This is the guy sitting on top of Saturn V rocket, and they said, what were you thinking at that time? And he said, well, I was thinking about the fact that I'm on 2 million components bought at the cheapest price. Which is really interesting, right? Because he's living what I think is quite a lot more exciting life than me, and yet his mind went to procurement and what we do when he was sat there as they're about to light the burners. Bit of an aside, because I like the quote. But I want to bring it back down to procurement and to Earth level and something relevant for us today. So what I did, I Googled, I thought this was quite funny, I Googled procurement office, and this is the top image that I found. If you can't see it properly, it's probably 60 or 70 ring binders times 5 from different bidders who are making a tender submission, as I found out, for a 20-mile long road in the United States. So I Googled a bit further and found out what happened. And what happened is that the provider of ring binders that could find the best debt finance, the cheapest debt finance, built the road. So think of all of the value that's been written, no doubt, in those documents about environmental benefits or not, about engineering innovation, about the people who are going to live by that road, all of those things that people have put their heart and soul into for some time, and they could have just asked for a spreadsheet with the costs in. I think that's really quite interesting. I'm probably doing them an injustice if I knew all the details, possibly. But the other thing is, if there's any salespeople in here, just note that if you're the guy that gets your bid in at the last minute, it ends up on the floor. You don't want to be on the floor. You don't want your bid on the floor. So, but back on Earth, this is kind of our history, isn't it, as procurement people? It's about control. Do you think the control that we place as procurement on our organizations has ever actually stopped some innovation that might have been useful and might have helped us compete in this disruptive world? Probably, yeah. Thinking about cost savings, thinking about doing it in the cheapest way. We don't like that word, but that's often how we're operating. Has that helped our businesses and helped our companies? And then economies of scale. We will all have a BlackBerry. We will all have a shade of grey Dell laptop. I guess that's fine, but again, is that sometimes stopping innovation? I've heard of stories where people have actually gone rogue, they've become maverick spenders, they've bought technology into companies, and then those have ended up being the key products that have gone forward in those companies. So sometimes, perhaps we need to break the straitjacket a little bit of the procurement world. Let's stop thinking of ourselves a bit like the policeman and start being the facilitator. And that goes really, really deep because it's like a circular thing. We act like the policeman, so innovators avoid us till the last minute and hope that they can get us to agree to something way too late when we can't add value. So there's this sort of vicious circle that goes on. We need to turn that into a virtuous circle. So we're helping innovate. We're saying, yes, why don't you do that? Let me help you do it. Let me help you execute those contracts in a way that allows you to be innovative and keeps our company safe, rather than it being the opposite way around, where you hear about it really late, they've already got sponsorship from somebody in the C-suite, and you're just the guy that's being asked to, cross the I's and dot the T's. I mean, have people been in that situation? Yeah, there's a few nods. I think that's the honest answer. But things are really changing, and so there's other reasons, sort of right here, right now, that mean we need to get ready to move, because procurement is moving too. This is really a recipe of 3 things. There's a whole lot of other things, but I've chosen 3 core things. So Moore's law, which means that the transistor count And a CPU doubles roughly every year, and it has done. People have said it's going to stop, and it's never stopped. And that means that technology is moving on at a rate of knots. That means the smartphone information revolution took place because it was possible. Interesting example, we go to the World Economic Forum as Tradeshift, and we do a lot of content there with CNBC. And 3 years ago, they came along with their video production truck, and it was a truck. 2 years ago, they came along with like a transit van. And then last year, it was a guy with a bag and some kits and dongles for his Mac. Better quality and faster, recently, and yet in 3 years, that massive change. And it's happening everywhere and all around us. So the available computing power. I mean, everyone knows this, all of this, going back to the space thing about how my smartphone could have easily done the moon missions, etc. It's all done on a slide rule. That incredible change in computing power. So that's one part of the recipe. The other thing is the Internet of Things. So everything now is creating data. I hope, somebody probably scanned your badge as you came in. It's a data point. I've got a Fitbit on in the hope that, it might make me fitter one day. But it's wearable technology, and it's creating data the whole time. Our cars, our phones in our pockets, so many things are now connected to the internet. I had a really interesting surprise recently, buying a washing machine. So 1 year standard warranty, 5 if you put it on the Wi-Fi and tell them who's in your, who's in your family. Not personally, but what age is and who's there. And I suppose the manufacturer of that device is now going to understand what a family like mine does with a washing machine and what power it draws and which components are wearing out. And when it breaks, they can come out with the diagnostics already done. But just think of the data even that is producing about people's habits. So the significant thing about the Internet of Things is the creation of vast data sets. So you have computing power, you have vast amounts of data, and then we're starting now to see real artificial intelligence. So that's having something to apply to that data and make meaningful and interesting analysis of it. Huge amounts of money funding pouring into the development of artificial intelligence, and Tradeshift is a recipient in that. Our whole take on procurement and looking at our network is about artificial intelligence and what we can leverage in the data set. So we're part of this graph as Tradeshift. So those three things are combining. It's kind of in kind of like a rotating, self-fulfilling circle and changing everything around us. So with all of this going on in procurement and affecting us, is this the right kind of view? So actually one of our competitors had this as a strapline for a while, so I'll just be honest about that. But is that the right view? So sure, buy that technology, take some more of your supplier's margin, but what's that going to change in terms of driving real value and bringing success to your businesses? I actually noticed today that that's changed in its value as a service, so kudos, I think that's exactly right, and that's what story we should be telling as a procurement technology industry to our customers, so that's really good. But now I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tradeshift. It's not as a sales pitch, it's actually as an example of the sort of story and topic I'm trying to talk about. So what things can procurement technology, what's it able to do these days? And what's quite interesting is that it tends to be those things that are really about cost, about analysis, about transactions, about big lumps of data. It's not actually about using your relationship skills to get alongside a supplier and planning how you may be able to produce a product more efficiently. That's not actually what it's doing yet. But I can tell you what it is doing. And first of all, I'll just give you what Tradeshift is in sort of 30 seconds. So we're an e-commerce network. We've got about 1.5 million companies connected on that network, and they're transacting, buying and selling with one another, and there's all kinds of other functions that are happening within that network as well. And then we have a platform layer which allows you to build your own processes on top of the network. Till now, really the procurement technology industry has been about putting together software that helps you with your processes. We're about making that network powered, and that's what Tradeshift is all about. And you can use like Lego block applications. We have some to support P2P, or you can use your own, you can develop your own, you can use any third party, all leveraging the Tradeshift network. So that's what Tradeshift is, and it's just relevant to the story. So here's a self-driving car. It's the Google one. If my 12-year-old son said to me, I might become a public service professional driver, I would probably say that skill set may not be relevant in the future, maybe in 10 years, in 15 years. That's probably not where to go. And are we doing that by being cost-focused, transactional-orientated procurement people? Are we sort of setting ourselves up as the driver who's going to be replaced by self-driving procurement? So to introduce you to Ada. Ada is our artificial intelligence layer in Tradeshift. It's obviously a marketing name, like a personification of a bit of technology. And she can do some really very interesting things. So this is just one example. She's already better than humans at looking at non-PO invoices and understanding how to code those and where to put them in your company accounts. And that's just one example of lots of things that Ada can do. And why can she do that? It's because she can look at all of the hierarchical relationships of products right across the network. She can understand how they relate to each other. They can understand who's selling and buying which elements, and then start to make conclusions about how we should be dealing with them. She can do approvals. Do we need to approve every single thing, or should we just sample? You do need a human doing approvals because it creates a psychology of somebody who's going to look at this. But you could do that by exception quite easily and get the approval right nearly all the time with artificial intelligence. She can look at things that are anomalous and problematic and decide whether we should be letting that go forward or have we got a problem. But all kinds of stuff she can do. And also you can go and talk to her like it's a bit like WhatsApp on the side of the screen. And it seems like it's a person. So you can put in like what would normally need a technician to build some kind of query. You can ask her a question and she'll go through the data warehouse and give you nearly all the time a sensible answer. So kind of remarkable. But the reason I'm telling that story is because it's here, it's growing, and that means that we really do now need to focus on what's value. It needs to stop being the CPO conversation I was talking about at the beginning where we say, I'm the innovative guy, I'm the value generator, but actually, no, our real objective is making a 2% saving this year or whatever it is. Because of this kind of technology, that's all going to be automated and dealt with in the future. So we really need to start thinking about the cool things that we can do, the interesting things that we can do. So let's actually think about that. So what things can we do as procurement people that might actually be useful and value generating in our organizations on top of the traditional things that we do? This is kind of like, I like to have a takeaway slide. So I don't mean Indian, Chinese, pizza. I mean that you can take away and maybe grab one of these ideas and give it a try. So, the first one, find some real companies that aren't your suppliers, that are innovators, and go and build relationships with them. Have an innovation day, bring them in, ask them what their 5-year product roadmap is, ask them what their 10-year prediction for your industry is, ask them about what they think is really good about your existing suppliers who are their competitors, ask them what you think their weaknesses are. And they'll want to do that, they'll love to collaborate with you because they'll think that maybe they can find some business, and that's how commerce works, right? But build those relationships outside of controlling your suppliers. That's one idea. What about taking some of your suppliers, not necessarily your key and most important suppliers, but choose them for whatever reason you decide, but take a small pot and decide to treat them differently. Maybe set aside a small innovation budget, maybe change the red tape around you operate around those particular suppliers. ask them to move to perhaps output specifications where they're delivering outcomes for you and not, spreadsheet lists of requirements and products. But see if you can change the way you work with just a small group of suppliers and see if you learn anything from that. You may well suddenly find that you can produce something valuable and innovative for your company that you never could before. So kind of unchain them, liberate them. And by the way, this is true. I've been a vendor working with procurement people in that part of my wearing that hat for a long time. And you do have situations where just to move forward is so painful and difficult, not just because of procurement, but because of the whole infrastructure of bureaucracy around big companies. See if you can address that for a few suppliers and see what happens. Go and talk to the C-suite, talk to the CFO, the COO, the CEO, the sales director, and say, apart from this cost objective, this savings objective you've given me this year, what are the 3 most important things you think we could learn from our supply chain? And then correlate those, find the 3 that are common, and go out and run a survey process, or go out and talk to as many suppliers as possible about those things that you want to know. So use them as a knowledge base, not just as a way of running transactions and buying things. Remember cost, it's I give this up and I obtain that. Well, no, don't do that. Think about it like the air. I've got all that knowledge out there. I'm going to go and, in a structured way, go and try and pull some of it into my company. And then finally, another idea of things you could do that are value creating and generating and not just about the cost control. The net promoter score, that's a trade name, but there's all kinds of ways you can measure how much you're pleasing your customers, and vendors do it all the time, and you like it, I imagine, because it helps you understand your suppliers. But why don't you go out and say, how good are we to deal with as procurement? What is it that works? What is it that doesn't? What are the things that are stopping us providing value to us? So actually go and turn the gun on yourself a little bit and get that feedback, but not just from the suppliers, also from the people in your companies, the people that you serve in your companies. What is it that we can help you with? What stops you from work? Why is it that you bring us things at the last minute to cross the T's and dot the I's? And actually understand what it is you're doing right and wrong, even if it's not great reading the first time. So some of these things that out in the market and on the sales side you do naturally, start to do some of those as procurement people. So these are just ideas, right, that I've jotted down that are about, the kind of things that CPO says, oh, Ian, I'm not a cost tactician, I'm a strategic guy. Those are some of the things that he probably should be doing if that was more than business buzzwords. So just to start to wrap up then, this quote is actually by me. But because it's in italics and it's got quote marks, it makes it feel authoritative. But I think it is true. So if you're just thinking about costs, they're finite. So somebody's trading, they have a margin. That's the only available place you can save money. And that has a ceiling before they're not going to trade with you anymore. And that isn't fundamentally interesting to the board. Lots of times we have conversations, why don't we really get a seat at the board? It's because that's been the story of procurement. But value creation, being innovative, building relationships, understanding where our market's going, bringing suggestions, facilitating the innovation of our colleagues, that's something that actually, in some senses, costs less. We don't necessarily have to give much, apart from changing behaviors, to get it, and it's hugely valuable. So cost saving, finite, value creation, limitless, right? So that is the way to think about this topic. So I hope that's been interesting. I was really keen to try and take the topic seriously and think about it as a way of, getting us all thinking and maybe getting some people to talk over coffee, as opposed to taking the temptation to pitch at you. So I hope that's hit some notes and you found it interesting. Just as a final point, we have a charity budget in Tradeshift UK for £1,200, so it's not a huge amount of money a month. And this month, we're going to give it to a nominated charity pulled out of a hat from one of you guys. So Not a lot of money, but it might be very, very valuable to a charity that you support. And full transparency, we're going to take your contact details off you for that pleasure. But please come by, take part in that, and then it'll be another way of making this day useful. So that's me. Thank you for listening.